The galaxy had learned long ago not to challenge the Drakari Empire. 12 star systems bowed before Empress Valdris, and for good reason. She was a living mountain of scales and fury, ancient beyond counting, powerful beyond measure. When she spread her wings, they blocked out suns. When she roared, planets trembled. No weapon forged could pierce her hide. No warrior born could match her strength. The throne room stretched larger than most cities, carved from a single piece of black crystal that had once been the core of a dead world. Valdris lounged upon her seat of melted starship hulls, her massive form radiating heat that made the air shimmer. Around her stood representatives from 24 conquered species, each keeping a respectful distance. They called themselves ambassadors, but everyone knew the truth. They were hostages dressed in fine robes, insurance that their worlds would continue to obey. Every cycle, the same ritual played out. Challengers would come from across the known worlds, seeking to prove their worth through combat. Valdris never refused. She enjoyed these trials. They reminded the galaxy why she ruled, why resistance was pointless. The last challenger had been a Vorlith war chief, massive and terrible, wielding weapons that could carve through battleship armor. He had lasted 43 seconds before Valdris reduced him to ash. That had been 3 days ago. The scorch marks still decorated the arena floor. Valdris was bored. 800 years of rule had brought her everything except the one thing she truly wanted: a challenge. Someone who could make her think, make her try, make her feel something beyond the crushing inevitability of victory. But it seemed the universe had no such being to offer. Then the sensors detected something unusual. A small vessel, primitive by Drakari standards, had appeared at the edge of their space. It broadcast no military signals, carried no heavy weapons, just a simple exploration craft from a species the Empire had never encountered. The ship called itself the Wanderer, and its crew identified themselves as human. Valdris ordered them brought before her. New species were rare enough to be interesting, at least for a few moments. The humans were escorted into the throne room by a squad of Drakari warriors, each warrior large enough to crush the entire group with one claw. There were 7 humans total, wearing matching blue suits that looked almost comically fragile. They stared up at Valdris with wide eyes, and she could smell their fear mixing with something else. Curiosity, perhaps? How strange. "Kneel before the Empress," commanded her herald, a scaled official whose voice boomed through the chamber. 6 of the humans dropped to their knees immediately. The 7th, a young male with dark hair and calm eyes, lowered himself more slowly. He was looking around the throne room, studying the architecture, the assembled species, the technology. Valdris found this mildly amusing. "You are far from home, little creatures," Valdris said, her voice like grinding consonants. "Your vessel is primitive. Your bodies are weak. No claws, no scales, no venom, no natural weapons at all. Tell me why I should not simply end you now and save the galaxy from your inevitable failure." The humans looked at each other nervously. Finally, the young male who had been studying the room spoke up. "Because we haven't failed yet. We made it here, didn't we?" Several of the assembled ambassadors gasped. One did not speak to the Empress with such casual tone. The Drakari guards moved forward, but Valdris raised one claw to stop them. This was interesting. "Your name, human?" "David Reed, engineer." "This is my crew." "Engineer," Valdris repeated, tasting the word. "You build things. How quaint. And what could your fragile hands possibly build that would interest me?" David glanced at the nearest power conduit, then at the artificial gravity generators embedded in the floor. "Well, for starters, your energy conversion efficiency is terrible. You're losing about 30% to heat waste, and your gravity plating uses a distribution model that's at least 2 generations behind optimal. It works, but it's like using a hammer when you could use a precision tool." The throne room went silent. No one spoke to Valdris this way. No one criticized Drakari technology. The assembled ambassadors looked ready to faint. Valdris leaned forward, her massive head lowering until one enormous eye filled David's vision. He didn't flinch. Remarkable. "You dare suggest that my empire's technology is inferior?" "Not inferior," David said calmly. "Just not optimized." "There's a difference. You've never needed to optimize because you're so powerful that efficiency doesn't matter. Why improve when you can just overpower?" Valdris could have killed him with a thought. One breath of flame, one swipe of her claw. Instead, she laughed. It was a sound like avalanches, deep and terrifying, but genuine. I have conquered species 10 times your size. I have destroyed fleets that blotted out stars. I have ruled for 800 years, and in all that time, no being has ever been strong enough to challenge me. And you, a creature I could crush between two claws, think you understand strength? I think, David said carefully, that you've never had to understand strength. You were born with it. You've never had to fight for survival without it. My species has. We've spent our entire existence being weaker than everything around us. We learned to survive anyway. Valdris settled back on her throne, regarding this strange little being with newfound interest. The other humans looked terrified of their companion's boldness, but David himself remained steady. Your species interests me, Valdris declared. You will remain here as guests of the Empire. I wish to learn more about these humans who think they understand survival. It was not a request. The humans were led away to quarters in the palace complex. Comfortable but clearly a prison. As they left, Valdris watched David walk away, still looking at everything, still analyzing, still thinking. For the first time in a very long while, Valdris felt something other than boredom. She felt curious. The galaxy had learned long ago not to challenge the Drakari Empire. But perhaps, Valdris thought, the galaxy had never met humans before. Perhaps that would make all the difference. 3 weeks passed in the palace, and David Reed learned more about the Drakari Empire than he had ever wanted to know. The luxury of their quarters could not hide the truth. They were prisoners, exotic animals in a gilded cage kept alive only because the Empress found them amusing. His crew spent most of their time terrified, huddled together, whispering about escape plans that everyone knew were impossible. David spent his time differently. He explored every corridor they were allowed to access. He talked to the guards, learning their language with surprising speed. He observed the other species that served the Empire, noting how they walked with heads down, how they never made eye contact with the Drakari. Fear was the foundation of everything here, fear and overwhelming power. The palace itself was a monument to conquest. Trophies from 1,000 victories lined the halls, weapons from defeated warriors, banners from destroyed fleets. Even the furniture was made from the remains of those who had challenged Valdris and lost. It was meant to inspire awe and terror. For David, it inspired something else. Pity. All this power, all this strength, and the Empress seemed profoundly alone. He noticed her watching him sometimes, from high balconies or through transparent sections of wall, those massive eyes, ancient and intelligent, following his movements. She never approached, never spoke to him after that first meeting. Just watched, curious perhaps, or simply bored and looking for entertainment. The answer came during a state dinner in the Grand Hall. The human crew had been required to attend, dressed in robes provided by their hosts. They sat at a table far from the center, surrounded by representatives from a dozen species, all pretending the humans did not exist. David found the whole thing fascinating from an anthropological perspective. This was how the Empire functioned. Layers of dominance and submission, everyone knowing their place at the center of it all. Valdris reclined on a platform of precious metals, barely touching the feast prepared for her. She looked bored again, her massive head resting on one claw, her eyes half closed. Then the doors crashed open. A figure entered the hall and the assembled crowd went silent. It was a Vorlith, even larger than the war chief who had challenged Valdris before. This one wore biometallic armor that gleamed like mercury and carried weapons that hummed with barely contained energy. The Vorlith marched straight toward the center of the hall, stopped, and roared a challenge that shook the walls. Empress Valdris, I am Crothar, champion of the Seven Moons. I claim the right of trial by combat. Face me if you dare, the assembled crowd murmured with excitement. This was entertainment. This was what they came to see. Valdris lifted her head, suddenly more alert, a predatory gleam in her eyes. Another one, she said, almost to herself. Very well. Let us retire to the arena. The entire dinner party moved to the combat arena, a massive circular space with walls of reinforced crystal. The humans were herded along with everyone else, forced to watch. David's crewmate Lily grabbed his arm. Don't do anything stupid, she whispered urgently. Just keep quiet and maybe we'll survive this. David nodded, but his eyes were fixed on the arena floor. Valdris had descended, transforming as she moved. Her already massive form grew larger, wings unfurling, scales hardening into something that looked more like starship plating, then biological tissue. Fire leaked from between her teeth. She was magnificent and terrible. Crothar charged immediately, weapons blazing, moving with speed that seemed impossible for something so large. Plasma bolts struck Valdris and dissipated harmlessly. The Vorlith swung a blade that could cut through tank armor. It bounced off Valdris's scales without leaving a mark. Valdris yawned. Then she moved. One moment she was standing still. The next, her tail had swept Crothar's legs out from under him. Before the Vorlith could recover, one massive claw pinned him to the ground. The weapons fell from his grip. His armor cracked under the pressure. "Yield," Valdris said calmly. "I yield." Crothar gasped. "I yield." Valdris released him. The entire fight had lasted maybe 30 seconds. The crowd cheered. The Vorlith limped away, defeated but alive. Valdris returned to her platform, already looking bored again. Brute force, David muttered under his breath. Completely predictable. He had not meant for anyone to hear. But in the sudden quiet after the cheering died down, his voice carried further than he intended. Valdris's head snapped toward him, her eyes locking onto his position among the crowd. "What did you say, human?" The blood drained from Lily's face. The other humans looked ready to run, but there was nowhere to run to. David stood up slowly, meeting the Empress's gaze. "I said it was predictable. You're so much stronger than everyone else that you don't need strategy. You just overpower them. It's not really a fight. It's just waiting to see how long they last." The throne room had gone absolutely silent. Several ambassadors had stopped breathing. Even the Drakari guards looked shocked. Valdris rose to her full height, towering over the arena. "You dare criticize my combat skills? You who have no natural weapons, no armor, no strength whatsoever? What could a fragile human possibly know about fighting?" David felt his heart pounding, but he kept his voice steady. "I know that you've never faced a real challenge. Nobody here has ever made you think. They can't match your strength, so they try to use strength anyway, and they lose. That's not a test of power. That's just inevitability. And you believe you could do better?" "I believe," David said carefully, "that strength isn't just about physical power. You've built an entire empire on the idea that the strongest survive, but you've never actually tested what strength means. You've just assumed it means what you have." Valdris descended from her platform, moving closer. The crowd parted like water. She stopped just meters from David, close enough that he could feel the heat radiating from her massive form. "Prove it," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "Face me in trial by combat. 30 days from now. If you can force me to acknowledge you as a worthy opponent, your crew goes free. If you fail, all humans will serve the Empire as slaves. Do you accept?" Lily grabbed David's arm desperately. The other humans were frantically shaking their heads. This was suicide. This was insane. David was a 24-year-old engineer, not a warrior. He would be vapor before the fight even began. David looked up at Valdris, at those ancient eyes that had seen 800 years of unchallenged victory. He saw something there behind the power and the threat. Curiosity, loneliness, a desperate hope for something different. "I accept," David said. The crowd erupted. Some laughed, convinced this was the funniest thing they had ever witnessed. Others looked horrified at such foolishness. Valdris simply smiled, showing teeth the size of swords. 30 days, human. Prepare yourself as you see fit. I look forward to seeing what your species considers strength." As the Drakari guards escorted the humans back to their quarters, Lily was nearly in tears. "David, what have you done? She's going to kill you. She's going to kill all of us." But David was already thinking, already planning, his mind racing through possibilities. He had 30 days to do the impossible. 30 days to challenge a being who had never been challenged before. It would have to be enough. David had never been in a fight before. Not a real one. Growing up, he had been the kid who fixed broken equipment, who solved puzzles, who read engineering manuals for fun. Violence had never been his answer to anything. Now he had 28 days left to figure out how to survive against the most powerful being in 12 star systems. The palace archives became his home. The Drakari guards had orders to let him access whatever he wanted. Valdris apparently found his preparations entertaining. David spent every waking hour reading about Drakari history, biology, combat records. He studied videos of every trial by combat for the last century. He took notes until his hands cramped. What he learned was both helpful and terrifying. Drakari were apex predators, evolved on a world where everything was trying to kill everything else. Their scales could withstand plasma fire, Their regeneration could heal wounds that would kill other species instantly. They could breathe fire hot enough to melt steel, fly fast enough to break the sound barrier, and hit hard enough to shatter mountains. But David also learned something else. The Drukhari had never developed tactics. They had never needed to. They were so powerful that every fight was won through direct application of overwhelming force. Strategy, planning, adaptation, these concepts did not exist in their combat philosophy. You challenged, you fought, you won or died. Simple, brutal, predictable. Lily found him in the archives on day 5, surrounded by data screens and half-eaten meal packets. She looked exhausted and worried. "Please tell me you have a plan that doesn't end with you dying horribly," she said, dropping into a chair beside him. "I have the beginning of a plan," David said, rubbing his eyes. "I can't beat her with strength. That's obvious, but maybe I don't need to." The challenge was to make her acknowledge you as worthy. How do you do that without actually winning? By making her work for it, David said, pulling up a schematic of the arena. "Look at this. The arena is huge. Multiple terrain types, environmental controls. It's designed for spectacle, not efficiency. Valdris has fought there hundreds of times. She knows every inch. But she's always fought the same way. Opponents charge, she crushes them, everyone goes home." Lily studied the schematic, her engineer's mind starting to catch up. "You want to use the environment. I want to make her think." Every fight she's ever had lasted less than a minute, because her opponents tried to match her strength. I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to make it last as long as possible. I'm going to make her chase me, adapt, actually use that massive brain of hers. That sounds like a great way to make her angry before she kills you. David smiled despite himself. Maybe, but I've been watching her. She's not actually cruel. She's bored. 800 years of winning every fight in seconds. I think part of her wants to be challenged. I just have to give her that. The next weeks became a blur of preparation. David studied the arena's layout, memorizing every column, every platform, every environmental control. He requested access to an exosuit, something to give him mobility and protection. The Drukhari provided one, clearly considering it a pointless gesture. David spent days modifying it, stripping out unnecessary weight, improving the power distribution, adding features the original designers had never considered. He trained his body too, though not in the way a warrior would. He ran endurance drills, building his stamina. He practiced navigating obstacle courses in the exosuit until movement became instinctive. He studied human history, reading about every underdog victory, every time a smaller force had defeated a larger one through cleverness and persistence. His crew thought he was crazy, but slowly they started to help. Lily worked on the exosuit modifications. Their pilot, Grace Park, shared knowledge about spatial awareness and three-dimensional movement. Even their medic, Robert Chen, contributed, teaching David about adrenaline management and how to push through pain. On day 15, Valdris visited him. He was in a training room practicing quick directional changes in the exosuit when the massive doors opened and she entered. Even in her smallest form, she dominated the space. David stopped, breathing hard, and faced her. "You prepare diligently, human," she observed, "but you do not practice combat. You practice running away." "I practice surviving," David corrected. "There's a difference." Valdris moved closer, her movement surprisingly graceful for something so large. "Tell me, David Reed, why do you really accept this challenge? You must know the odds. Even if you survive the combat, you have made an enemy of the most powerful being you will ever meet. Why?" David wiped sweat from his face, considering his answer carefully. "Because you asked me to prove something. Because I think you deserve a real challenge, even if I'm not strong enough to provide one. And because my species doesn't give up. We've survived ice ages, plagues, predators, wars, disasters. We've almost gone extinct a dozen times, but we're still here. If I run away now, I'm saying that spirit doesn't matter. I can't do that." Something shifted in Valdris's expression, an emotion David could not quite identify. "Your species has nearly gone extinct multiple times? We're not apex predators. We're not the strongest or fastest or most dangerous. We're just stubborn. We adapt, we persist. We refuse to accept that we're supposed to lose. And you think this makes you strong? I think it makes us survivors. Maybe that's a different kind of strength than you're used to." Valdris was quiet for a long moment, studying him with those ancient eyes. Finally, she spoke again. "I have ruled for 800 years. I have conquered 12 star systems. I have faced every challenge the galaxy could offer. Do you know what I have never faced, David Reed? What? Uncertainty. I have always known I would win. Always. There has never been a moment of doubt, never a question of outcome. Every fight is simply going through the motions. She paused. You interest me because you should not be here. By all logic, you should have knelt and begged for mercy. Instead, you challenge me with words, with ideas, with this strange human persistence. I do not know what you will do in the arena. For the first time in longer than I can remember, I do not know the outcome before it begins. Is that why you accepted my challenge? Because you wanted to feel uncertain? Perhaps, Valdris admitted. Or perhaps I simply wanted to meet someone who could make me question what strength truly means. Your species is strange, David Reed. Weak by every measure I understand, yet somehow here, somehow defiant, somehow surviving. I want to understand how. She turned to leave, then paused at the door. Train well, human. I expect you to give me a genuine challenge. Do not disappoint me. After she left, David stood in the empty training room, processing what had just happened. The Empress of the Drakari Empire had essentially admitted she was lonely, that all her power had isolated her from anything meaningful, that she needed someone to make her feel something other than inevitable victory. Lily appeared in the doorway moments later. Was that what I think it was? A conversation, yes. A strange one. David, I think she likes you. In whatever way a massive dragon empress can like someone. David laughed, but it sounded uncertain. She respects honesty, at least. That's something. With 13 days remaining, David finalized his strategy. He could not win through strength. He could not hurt Valdris, but he could do something no one in 800 years had done. He could make the fight last. He could make her work, make her think, make her feel challenged. It was not much of a plan, but it was all he had. And as his species had proven time and again throughout history, sometimes all you needed was refusal to give up. The countdown continued. The galaxy watched, and David Reed prepared to do the impossible. The arena had never held so many spectators. Representatives from every species in the Empire filled the stands, joined by countless more watching through broadcast feeds across 12 star systems. They had come to witness what everyone assumed would be the shortest, most pathetic challenge in recorded history. A human fragile and weak facing the Empress herself. It would be entertainment. It would be a reminder of the natural order. David stood in the challenger's entrance, checking his exosuit one final time. The suit was lightweight, built for mobility rather than protection. Against Valdris, armor would be meaningless anyway. Better to be fast. Lily had done excellent work on the modifications. The power cells would last hours if he managed them correctly. The servo assists would let him move faster than his body normally could, if he managed to survive long enough to need them. You don't have to do this, Lily said beside him. She had insisted on being there until the last moment. We can find another way. We can escape somehow. David smiled at her, trying to look more confident than he felt. There is no escape. This is the only way. Trust me. I do trust you. I'm just terrified I'm about to watch you die. Then don't watch. Go back to quarters. Wait for news. Lily shook her head. No way. If you're brave enough to walk out there, I'm brave enough to watch. She hugged him quickly. Make us proud. Make humanity proud. Then she was gone, and David was alone with his thoughts and his racing heartbeat. He could hear the crowd outside, their voices a dull roar of anticipation. In minutes, those voices would either be cheering his impossible victory or laughing at his predictable death. The entrance doors opened. Brilliant light flooded in. David took a deep breath and walked forward. The arena floor stretched before him, a landscape of artificial terrain, rocky outcroppings, metal platforms, cooling vents, energy barriers, all designed for spectacle, for variety, for giving challengers false hope that terrain might matter. David had memorized every inch. He knew where every control panel was, every structural weakness, every environmental system. Across the arena, the opposite entrance opened. Valdris emerged in her full combat form, and the crowd went wild. She was massive beyond belief, scales gleaming like polished obsidian. Wings spread wide enough to shade half the arena floor. Fire leaked from between teeth the size of swords. Her eyes found David immediately, intelligent and curious. The herald's voice boomed across the arena. Trial by combat. David Reed of Earth challenges Empress Valdris. The terms, should the human prove himself worthy, his species goes free. Should he fail, humanity serves the Empire. Let the challenge begin, the crowd roared. Valdris settled into a ready stance, clearly giving David the first move. She was confident, amused, curious to see what this strange human would try. David ran, not toward her, away, sprinting for the nearest rocky outcropping, using the exosuit's servo assist to move faster than human muscles alone could manage. Behind him, he heard Valdris's surprised laugh, then the thunderous sound of her movement as she pursued. A gout of flame washed over the rocks where David had been standing seconds before. The stone melted like wax. David rolled, changed direction, kept moving. The crowd was laughing now. This was what they expected. The human was running away like prey. But David was not just running. He was moving with purpose, leading Valdris on a specific path. As she unleashed another blast of fire, David triggered a control panel hidden beneath debris. A cooling system activated, flooding the area with vapor that momentarily obscured vision. When Valdris's next attack came, David had already moved. Minutes passed, then 10 minutes. The crowd's laughter began to fade, replaced by confusion. This was taking longer than any challenge in recent memory. Valdris was not crushing the human immediately. She was chasing, attacking, missing. The human kept moving, kept dodging, kept surviving. David's lungs burned. His muscles screamed. But he kept going, staying just ahead of destruction, using every trick he had planned. He triggered terrain collapses that Valdris had to dodge. He activated energy barriers that forced her to adjust her position. He used the three-dimensional space, climbing, jumping, forcing Valdris to attack from awkward angles. None of it hurt her. He knew it would not. But every missed attack was energy wasted. Every repositioning was thought required. For the first time in centuries, Valdris was having to think about her next move. 30 minutes into the fight, Valdris landed in front of David's escape route, cutting him off. She was not even breathing hard, but there was something new in her eyes. Focus, engagement, clever human. But running forever is not victory. I'm not trying to win, David gasped, his chest heaving. I'm trying to survive. There's a difference. Valdris's tail swept the area behind David, eliminating another escape route. Then survive this. She unleashed a coordinated attack, fire from above, tail sweep from the side, claws from the front. David had planned for this. He triggered his exosuit's emergency boost, launching himself straight up and over Valdris's attack. He caught a platform above, pulled himself up, kept moving. The crowd had gone silent. This was not supposed to be happening. Challenges did not last an hour. Humans did not make the Empress work this hard. David was slowing down. He could feel it. His body was reaching its limits. The exosuit was burning through power reserves faster than he had hoped. But he had accomplished something. He had made Valdris think. He had made this a challenge. 2 hours in, David's exosuit failed. A servo gave out with a grinding sound and suddenly movement was harder, slower. Valdris noticed immediately. She was on him in seconds, one massive claw pinning him against a rock wall. Not hard enough to crush, but hard enough that he could not escape. David struggled uselessly against the grip. His body was beyond exhaustion. Every muscle trembled. But he met Valdris's eyes, refusing to look away. You have fought well, human, Valdris said, her voice surprisingly gentle. Better than anyone in 800 years. But it ends now. No, David managed to say. Not yet. You cannot even move. Your suit is broken. Your body is failing. What more can you possibly do? I can refuse to give up, David said. That's what humans do. We don't quit. We don't accept defeat. You can kill me, but I won't stop trying to survive. That's our strength. That's what you've never faced before. Valdris tilted her massive head, studying him. Why continue when you know you cannot win? Because winning is not the point. The point is not quitting. My species has been knocked down 1,000 times. Ice ages, meteor strikes, plagues, predators, natural disasters. We should have gone extinct. But we didn't, because we refused. Every time we got knocked down, we got back up. That's not physical strength. That's something else. And you call that strength? I call it being human. The arena was absolutely silent. Every being watching held their breath, waiting to see what the Empress would do. Valdris stood perfectly still for a long moment, her eyes locked with David's. Then she released him. David collapsed to the ground, his legs unable to support him. Valdris stepped back, spreading her wings. I acknowledge you as a worthy opponent, she declared, her voice carrying across the arena. For the first time in 800 years, I have been challenged. Not in strength, but in spirit. This human has shown me something I had forgotten. That true strength is not the absence of weakness. It is the refusal to let weakness define you. The crowd erupted in shocked voices. This was impossible. The human had not won, but he had achieved something perhaps more remarkable. He had made the Empress acknowledge him. David lay on the ground, unable to move, barely able to breathe, but he smiled. He had done it. Somehow, impossibly, he had done it. News of the challenge spread like wildfire across the Empire. A human, a species barely known, had lasted 2 hours against the Empress. More than that, Valdris herself had acknowledged him as worthy. The event shattered assumptions that had stood for centuries. If physical strength was not the only measure of worth, what did that mean for the entire social order? David spent 3 days recovering in the palace medical facility. Drakari doctors, fascinated by human physiology, treated his injuries with surprising care. Exhaustion, muscle damage, minor burns, but nothing permanent. He had survived. His crew visited constantly, barely able to believe he was alive. Lily cried when she first saw him, relief overwhelming her composure. "You insane, beautiful idiot," she said, hugging him carefully around his bandages. "You actually did it." "We did it," David corrected. "The exosuit modifications you made gave me the speed I needed. I couldn't have lasted 5 minutes without them." But even as David recovered, tensions built in the palace. The Drakari court was in chaos. Advisors argued in heated sessions about what the Empress's acknowledgement meant. Some dismissed it as a momentary whim. Others saw it as dangerous precedent. If a human could be worthy without physical power, then the entire foundation of the Empire's hierarchy was questionable. General Therax was the loudest voice of opposition. He was old even by Drakari standards, massive and scarred from countless battles. He had served the Empire for 600 years, and he believed absolutely in the old ways. Strength through power, dominance through force. The weak serve the strong. That was the natural order. David first met Therax on his 4th day of recovery. The general arrived at the medical facility unannounced, his presence filling the room like a thunderstorm. "So this is the human who has charmed our Empress," Therax said, his voice dripping with contempt. "You are small, weak. You possess no qualities that should earn respect. Yet here you are, treated as a guest rather than the prey you are." David, sitting up in his medical bed, met the general's hostile gaze calmly. "I'm not trying to charm anyone. I just proved a point." "You proved nothing except that our Empress has grown soft. 800 years of rule, and she has forgotten what true strength means. She humors a weak species, pretends their tricks are worthy of respect. It is an insult to everything the Empire stands for. Maybe what the Empire stands for is worth questioning." Therax moved closer, and despite himself, David felt fear. This creature could kill him with a breath. "You dare suggest the Empire is flawed?" "I suggest that strength is more complex than you think. The Empress understands that." "Why don't you?" "Because I remember what the Empire was before it grew weak. When we conquered through pure power, not through entertaining lesser beings. Those were better times." After Therax left, David felt unsettled. The general was not just opposed to him personally. He was opposed to everything David represented, to the very idea that the Empire's philosophy might be incomplete. The next week brought strange changes. Valdris began implementing new policies that shocked the court. She established advisory councils that included representatives from non-Drakari species. She ordered efficiency reviews of Imperial technology, inviting outside perspectives. She even suggested that future trials by combat include strategic components, not just displays of raw strength. The Empire had never seen changes like this. For 800 years, the system had been stable. Now everything felt uncertain. David found himself drawn into these changes. Valdris requested his presence at council meetings, asking for his input on technology, on governance, on ways to improve efficiency. His crew was given real positions within the palace, their engineering expertise finally valued rather than dismissed. But not everyone welcomed these developments. Whispers of dissent grew louder. David began noticing hostile stares from certain Drakari officials. Security around the human quarters increased. Something was building. Lily noticed it too. "We're making enemies," she told David one evening. "Powerful enemies who think we're corrupting their Empress." "They're afraid of change," David said. Change is always scary, especially when it challenges everything you believe. Afraid people do dangerous things. She was right to worry. That night, assassins struck. 3 Drakari warriors moving silently, entering the human quarters through maintenance passages. They had orders to kill David and make it look like an accident. The Empress would be saddened, but she would move on. The Empire would return to normal. What the assassins did not expect was that humans had been preparing for exactly this scenario. Grace Park, their pilot, had been maintaining watch schedules. Robert Chen had set up early warning sensors. When the assassins entered, alarms triggered. The fight was brief and brutal. Humans could not match Drakari in direct combat, but they did not try. Instead, they used the environment, tactics learned from years of surviving in hostile situations. They sealed corridors, activated emergency systems, created chaos that forced the assassins to navigate unfamiliar territory. David and Lily managed to trigger a palace-wide alert before the assassins could reach them. Imperial guards arrived within minutes, finding the human quarters transformed into an improvised fortress, with the would-be killers trapped in a maze of emergency barriers and redirected power systems. The assassins were captured alive, and under interrogation they revealed everything. General Therax had ordered the attack, not just against David, but against the very idea he represented. The general had been planning a larger move, gathering support among traditionalist factions, preparing to challenge Valdris's new direction. When Valdris learned of the assassination attempt, her rage shook the palace. She summoned Therax to the throne room, and this time there were no formalities, no diplomatic courtesies. "You dare order attacks on beings under my protection?" Valdris's voice was thunder. "You dare question my judgment, my authority, my right to change my own empire?" Therax stood defiant. "I dare because someone must. You have forgotten what we are, what makes us strong. You waste time with weak creatures, change traditions that have served us for millennia, all because one human made you feel uncertain for a few hours. It is weakness, Empress, and I will not stand by while you weaken everything our ancestors built." "Then stand forward," Valdris commanded. "Challenge me properly if you believe I am weak. Face me in combat and prove your convictions." Therax smiled grimly. "I accept, but not alone. The old ways permit a champion to bring allies when the stakes are high enough. I claim that right. I bring 12 warriors, the finest the Empire has ever produced. We will show you what true Drakari strength looks like." The court gasped. This was within the ancient rules, technically legal, but it had not been done in centuries. 12 against 1, even against Valdris, would be a serious fight. Therax was not just challenging her authority, he was trying to kill her. Valdris's eyes narrowed. "Very well. Name your time and place." "The Festival of Flames, 3 days hence, before the entire Empire." After Therax left, Valdris remained on her throne, thinking. David approached carefully, knowing he was interrupting. "He's going to try to kill you for real," David said quietly. 12 trained warriors with forbidden weapons and strategies. "This is not about honor. This is about removing you from power." "I am aware," Valdris said. "And under the old rules, I must face them alone." "That is tradition. What if you didn't face them alone?" Valdris looked at him sharply. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that you just spent weeks arguing that strength comes in many forms. That working together, combining different abilities, is more effective than raw power alone. Therax is using those same principles against you by bringing allies. Why can't you?" "Because I am the Empress. I have always fought alone." "And maybe that's the problem," David said softly. "Maybe true strength is knowing when to accept help." Valdris was silent for a long moment, processing this. Finally she spoke. "You would stand with me? You who I nearly killed just weeks ago? You acknowledged me as worthy. Let me prove it meant something. Let all of us prove it. Humans and Drakari fighting together. Show the Empire what cooperation looks like." For the first time in 800 years, Empress Valdris considered asking for help, and against all her instincts, against centuries of tradition, the idea felt right. The Festival of Flames was the Empire's oldest celebration, marking the anniversary of the first Drakari conquest among the stars. Billions watched across 12 systems as the arena filled with spectators. This was supposed to be a day of pride and tradition. Instead, it had become a battleground for the Empire's very soul. General Therax stood with his 12 chosen warriors, each one a veteran of countless battles, each enhanced with bioweapons that pushed the limits of what was legally permitted. They wore armor designed specifically to resist Valdris's fire. They carried weapons that could pierce her scales. This was not a challenge. This was an assassination dressed in ritual. On the opposite side, Valdris stood with the 7 humans. The crowd had reacted with shock and outrage when the Empress announced she would fight alongside them. This violated every tradition, every principle the Empire held sacred. The strong fought alone. That was the way. But Valdris had made her decision, and she faced the crowd with absolute confidence. The rules say I may not refuse a properly issued challenge. They do not say I must fight by the challenger's assumptions. General Therax brings allies to prove the value of combined strength. So do I. Therax's laugh boomed across the arena. You mock the sacred combat by bringing prey to stand beside you. Those fragile creatures will be ash in the first moments. You disgrace yourself and everything the Empire represents. David stepped forward wearing a new exosuit built from the finest Drakari technology, modified with human innovation. Beside him stood Lily, Grace, Robert, and the other 3 crew members, each equipped and ready. They looked tiny compared to the Drakari warriors, but they stood firm. We'll see who becomes ash, David said calmly. The herald's voice rang out. Trial by combat. General Therax and his champions challenge Empress Valdris and her chosen allies. Combat begins now. Therax's warriors charged immediately. A coordinated assault meant to overwhelm through pure aggression. This was Drakari combat at its finest, brutal and direct. But Valdris did not meet them head-on. Instead, she took flight, moving to the position David had indicated in their planning. The humans scattered and the Drakari warriors hesitated, confused. This was not how battles worked. Where was the direct confrontation? That hesitation cost them. David had studied the arena for weeks, and now he put that knowledge to use. He triggered environmental systems that created zones of extreme heat and cold, forcing the warriors to adjust their positions. Lily activated defensive barriers that channeled the fight into narrow spaces. Grace used her pilot's sense of 3-dimensional movement to coordinate their team's positions. Valdris struck from above, targeting warriors that the humans had isolated, using precision instead of overwhelming force. When 2 warriors tried to flank her, David triggered a collapse that forced them back. When another charged the humans directly, Valdris's tail sweep sent him crashing into a wall. This was not traditional combat. This was strategy, coordination, adaptation, everything the Drakari had never needed to learn. Therax roared in frustration. Stand and fight with honor. Honor is not dying stupidly, Valdris called back. That lesson took me 800 years to learn. Thank you for the opportunity to demonstrate it. The battle raged for 30 minutes, and slowly, impossibly, Therax's warriors began to fall, not killed but defeated, knocked unconscious or too injured to continue. The humans moved like shadows, striking where they were not expected, creating opportunities that Valdris exploited with devastating efficiency. Each small action compounded, each tactical decision building on the last. Finally, only Therax remained, standing alone against Valdris and the 7 humans. He was wounded, his armor cracked, his pride shattered. The crowd watched in absolute silence. You see now? Valdris said, breathing hard but triumphant. Strength is not just power. It is knowing when to use power, how to combine it with intelligence, with strategy, with cooperation. My human allies are individually weak, but together with me, we are stronger than any force you brought. That is the lesson you refused to learn. Therax collapsed to his knees, defeated not just physically but philosophically. Everything he believed had been proven wrong before billions of witnesses. Valdris stepped close to him. I could execute you for this betrayal. The old laws would support it. But I am instituting new laws. Laws that value growth over punishment, wisdom over blind tradition. You will live, General, and you will learn, as I have learned. She turned to address the entire arena, her voice carrying across the broadcast to every world in the Empire. For 800 years I ruled through strength alone. I believed that power was all that mattered. I was wrong. Today, I fought alongside beings who possess no physical power, yet their contribution made me stronger than I have ever been. This is the future of our empire. Not conquest through force, but growth through cooperation. Not dominance, but partnership. The crowd's reaction was mixed. Some cheered, seeing the wisdom in her words. Others sat in stunned silence, their worldview crumbling. But no one could deny what they had witnessed. The old ways had been challenged and found wanting. In the days that followed, Valdris began restructuring the empire in earnest. She abolished the principle of rule through strength alone, replacing it with the doctrine of combined strength. Different species brought different capabilities, and all would be valued. The humans were granted full citizenship and given positions of genuine authority. David became her chief strategic advisor, a role that would have been unthinkable weeks before. Not everyone accepted the changes. Some species left the empire, preferring their old ways. Some Drakari traditionalists refused to serve under the new system, but many more stayed, intrigued by the possibilities of this new approach. A month after the Festival of Flames, David prepared to leave. The human crew had stayed to help with the initial transitions, but they were explorers at heart. The galaxy was vast and they had barely seen any of it. Valdris met him in a private garden within the palace, one of the few places she could sit comfortably in her smaller form. She looked different now, somehow less alone despite being physically isolated. "You could stay," she said. "Continue as my advisor. Help build this new empire," David smiled. "You don't need me anymore. You've got plenty of people, human and otherwise, who understand what you're trying to do. Besides, humans are wanderers. We need to keep moving, keep exploring." "I understand. But I must ask, what did you truly gain from all this? You risked your life, changed an empire, and now you simply leave?" "I gained the knowledge that it was possible," David said. "That even the most powerful, most set in their ways being could change and grow. If you can do it, anyone can. That gives me hope for my species, for all species. And what did I gain?" David thought about that. "You gained uncertainty. You'll never be completely sure of outcomes again. Every decision will have variables you can't control. That probably feels uncomfortable." "It does," Valdris admitted. "But it also feels alive. For 800 years I knew exactly what would happen. Every fight, every challenge, every day. It was boring beyond measure. Now I wake uncertain of what each day will bring. It is terrifying and wonderful." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching alien stars rise over the palace. "Will you return?" Valdris asked eventually. "Maybe. The galaxy is big, but it's not that big. I'm sure we'll cross paths again. When you do, you will always be welcome. You and your entire species. You gave me the greatest gift anyone has ever given me. You made me question what I thought I knew." David stood to leave, then paused. "For what it's worth, I think you're going to be a better ruler now than you ever were before. Not because you're stronger or weaker, but because you're willing to admit you don't have all the answers. Coming from the human who challenged me to my face, I will take that as high praise." The next day, the human ship Wanderer departed from Drakari space, carrying its crew back toward Earth with stories that no one would quite believe. They left behind an empire in transformation, struggling with new ideas, questioning old assumptions, slowly learning that strength could mean something more than overwhelming power. Valdris watched them go from her throne room, feeling something she had not felt in centuries: gratitude. And perhaps, though she would never say it aloud, friendship. Years passed. The Drakari Empire evolved, sometimes painfully, into something new. Alliances formed with species that had previously been subjects. Technology advanced as different perspectives combined. The galaxy watched, uncertain but intrigued, as the most powerful empire in known space chose cooperation over domination. And sometimes, when Valdris sat alone in her throne room, she thought about a young human engineer who had stood before her and dared to suggest that strength was more than power. Who had survived 2 hours against her not through force but through refusal to give up. Who had changed everything simply by asking questions no one else had thought to ask. No being had ever been strong enough to truly challenge her, until she met a human boy who taught her that being challenged was the greatest strength of all. The willingness to change, to grow, to admit that even after 800 years there was still more to learn. The galaxy was vast and full of wonders, and for the first time in her long life, Valdris looked forward to discovering them, uncertain and alive, and finally, truly strong.